I don't know if the rest of you have fun with college basketball brackets or not, but March Madness has turned into March Madness for me this weekend because I went and picked Purdue to win it all, and then they were upset, and one of the biggest upsets ever in college basketball history when the number 16 seed beat the number 1 seed Purdue. So my bracket is completely busted. Strangely enough, the only other time that a number 16 seed beat a number 1 seed, that year I also picked the number 1 seed to win it all. So I don't know what the deal is there. But anyway, on ESPN.com, of the 20 million brackets that have been submitted, I am in the top 15 million. Thank you, Purdue. We are starting a brand new sermon series today, and I don't know if I can really call it a sermon series. It's really kind of a two-part series because in the life of this church, we're about to do an important vote, a historic vote, and so I thought it would be important for us to address that in a sermon prior to the vote and after the vote. So we have a 2-week sermon series, and so that's where we are. If you're visiting with us, we're glad you're here, and I hope that today's message, next week's message, will have some things for you that are true for all people in all times and places. But understand that right now, in the context of what our church is going through, there will be a lot in this sermon and next week's sermon that pertain to the local congregation. Today, I'm going to be sharing some stuff from the book of Esther in the Old Testament, and so I want to read the verses to you before we begin. Chapter 4, verses 10 through 14. Then Esther told Haddock to go back and relay this message to Mordecai. All the king's officials and even the people in the provinces know that anyone who appears before the king in his inner court without being invited is doomed to die unless the king holds out his gold scepter. And the king has not called for me to come to him for 30 days. So Haddock gave Esther's message to Mordecai. Mordecai sent this reply to Esther. Don't think for a moment that because you're in the palace you will escape when all other Jews are killed. If you keep quiet at a time like this, deliverance and relief for the Jews will arise from some other place, but you and your relatives will die. Who knows if perhaps you were made queen for just such a time as this. Let us pray. Lord, I thank you for our church. I thank you for the ways that we are able to connect as a church family, and I thank you for the essential foundations of faith that unite us as brothers and sisters in Christ. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be pleasing to you, I pray, in Jesus' name. Amen. So I'm sitting down today because I just wanted to share some really personal things with you, kind of a personal testimony of how this whole situation has impacted me and where I am. I want to start with this. On the first, about 1 month ago, on February 17th, Bishop Hector, our newly appointed bishop of the Upper New York Conference, sent a letter out to all of the clergy and laity concerning disaffiliation. And one of the things in the letter said this, the role of the pastor is not to advocate for any given position, but lead all the people under their care with a shepherd's heart. And he underlined is not in the letter to give that some emphasis. And for those of you who have been connected to our church for any amount of time, you know that, well, it's a little too late for that for me. Most of you know I have advocated for a position, and you know where I stand. And with all due respect to this bishop, I disagree with his assessment of the role of the pastor in this season. I feel like in order to maintain my integrity, it's been important for me to be open and transparent with all of you. So I have shared my views, but I have also always pointed out that good people of faith can disagree. And I think, I think for the most part you appreciate that. I mean, would you rather be exploring disaffiliation for months all the while guessing where I might stand on the matter? I don't think so. So the goal of, but there was one thing the bishop said in his letter that I did like and that I wanted to share with you too. He opened that particular paragraph that I quoted a moment ago with these words: clergy persons appointed to local churches are called to be pastoral to all congregation members, especially in times of disagreement. And that is true. And so I hope this message today is pastoral. I've struggled with coming up with an illustration to express to you how I feel about my role in all of this. And so I settled on this. I think it's kind of like, being part of Let's Make a Deal. Okay, bear with me. So I'm old school. So I remember Let's Make a Deal when Monty Hall was the host. Anybody else remember Monty Hall? We have a few. I know like Wayne Brady and some other people have come in and done that. I've never seen that. But Monty Hall was the one who taught me about this game show, which always featured, the studio audience dressed in crazy outfits and carrying silly signs, all in hopes that they would be selected to be a contestant and, get to trade with Monty Hall. So, so picture Monty Hall standing before the three doors on Let's Make a Deal, and behind door number 1 is a brand new car worth $6,000 because it's the 1970s, okay? And behind door number 2 is a vacation to the French Riviera worth about, $4,000. And then behind door number 3 is a mule named Kenny. And the contestant has to pick the door, and then after you pick the door without knowing what's behind it, that's the trick, right? And then Monty Hall tries to talk you out of it. Hey, I'll give you $100 instead of that door or whatever. So, Monty Hall knows what's behind the doors. And so when a contestant picks a door, sometimes he'll try to buy you out of that door. I've never trusted Monty Hall. He always seemed quite content to let that lady dressed as a peacock walk away with Kenny the mule and seemed completely fine with it, So when it comes to disaffiliation, I feel like it's a little bit like this. We have a choice between two doors. And like Monty Hall, I know a lot about what's behind those two doors because that's part of my job to know that. Well, I don't think most of you would like me to act like Monty Hall and say, hey, just pick a door and good luck with it. I think you would rather that I tell you a little bit about what's behind the door so that you can make an educated choice. And so that's what I've been trying to do for the last 7 months. Deciding whether or not to share my position with you was a question that was in my head last summer when I went to family Bible camp at Camp Finley. While I was there, at the time that I was there at family Bible camp, the annual conference had already been postponed to 2024. The protocol, which was the amicable separation that had been mediated and negotiated, was already off the table. The Global Methodist Church had already formed and provided a pathway for those who wanted to disaffiliate. So all of these things were in place, and there I was last summer trying to figure out what I should do as a pastor. I didn't have to say or do anything. We could, as a church, just simply have let the disaffiliation time expire, and we could let it all play out and hope for the best. I could have just agreed to support whatever book of discipline the church has, no matter what the changes are. I could say I'm going to support that. I don't think that would have much integrity, but I could have chosen to do that. I could have asked you to do the same, and we could just live happily ever after. We didn't have to explore disaffiliation, but I took a walk in the woods that day and spent some time alone listening to God, and it was as a result of that walk that I decided we as a church should explore disaffiliation. There were two thoughts that came to my head strongly while I was out there in that time alone. The first thought was that I couldn't make this church an idol in my life. And what I mean by that is that I couldn't let my love for this church and my love for being here exceed my love for God. You see, I knew that if we explored disaffiliation, there's a chance that we might not succeed, and if we did not succeed, then my days here would be numbered. And I couldn't let my desire to be here, I had to let go of my selfish desire to be here until retirement. I had to just let go of that and trust that God will be present no matter what happens. And so, it's kind of that age-old question that pastors should ask. Am I pleasing God or pleasing men? And so that was one of the thoughts that I had that day. The other thought I had coming out of the woods that day was that leaders lead. If I'm really called to be a pastoral leader of the congregation, then I need to lead this congregation as I feel led by God. And the Apostle Paul said the same thing. And in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, he says, follow me as I follow Christ. And so to me, that meant if I believe what's behind one door is better than what's behind another door, then I should tell you that, and I should try to lead you there. Now, I know that as I sit here today, that many of you think what's behind the door different than the one that I think is best. You think that door is best, and that's okay. We're all adults with minds of our own, and we get to choose. No one is forcing anyone to follow my lead in this. If they were, that would make us a cult. And if I wanted us to be a cult, I would make all of you cheer for the Pittsburgh Steelers. That would be my first. Seriously, I hope you at least see why I'm advocating for one of the two doors, because I really do believe it's best for the church's future. And so I've told you that. Again, you don't have to agree with that. But not only do I think one choice is better, but I also have seen my place here at this particular time as divinely appointed. And actually, I really felt that way from the start. It was 8 years ago this month that Bishop Webb called me and asked me to be the lead pastor of the United Methodist Church of Webster. And he told me two things when he asked me to do that. The first was that he said this church was struggling with two specific issues at the time, and he asked me to come in and try to focus on making an unhealthy church a healthy church. The second thing that he shared with me was that the staff parish relations team had requested a pastor with Orthodox theology and wanted an Orthodox pastor for their conservative congregation. In fact, I remember when I met the staff parish relations team, there was an interesting conversation where I had to convince them that I was conservative enough to be your pastor. So anyway, believing that we were a match, the bishop also wanted me to prepare the church to navigate the impending church split. And you're thinking, wait a second, 2015? Yeah, we've been talking church split for a long time, well over 8 years. And we at that time thought that the church was going to split in 2016. And now that it's actually happening, over 2,000 churches in the U.S. have already disaffiliated. Now is that time. And I believe that I'm here for such a time as this. That phrase for such a time as this comes from the Old Testament book of Esther. And some of you know that story where Esther is a Jewish queen. She's part of the Hebrew race. And King Xerxes is going to issue an edict that allows for them to kill all the Jews. And it's because this evil man Haman has convinced him to slaughter them all. And Esther's cousin Mordecai tells her that this could be her opportunity. She could be right where she is just for this moment. In fact, she says in Esther 4:14, or he says, Mordecai says, if you keep quiet at a time like this, deliverance and relief for the Jews will arise from some other place, but you and your relatives will die. Who knows if perhaps perhaps you were made queen for just such a time as this. So, I could keep quiet, or I could embrace my role as pastor at this particular time in this particular place. So, if I'm meant to be here for such a time as this, then we must wrestle with this tension that we have in the church between unity and division. Now, at first glance, it seems obvious that Christians would take the side of unity and avoid division, but we all know that in real life, things aren't always that easy. Life has a way of complicating matters. When we look at Ephesians chapter 4, we see a very clear example of how the Bible speaks highly of unity. In Ephesians 4, verses 3 through 6, it says, "Make every effort to keep yourselves united in the Spirit, binding yourselves together with peace. For there is one body and one Spirit, just as you have been called to one glorious hope for the future. There is one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all, in all, and living through all." So, make every effort to keep yourselves united in the Spirit. I mean, that seems pretty clear that unity is important, right? But united in what? Well, one body, one Spirit, one hope, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God. It makes it even more clear. In a perfect world, God desires unity. But the same person who wrote those words, the Apostle Paul, he had a little trouble living by them. In fact, we see that in Acts chapter 15 when Paul and Barnabas have a disagreement. Does Paul say to Barnabas, "Let's make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit"? Not exactly. Let's look at Acts chapter 15 and see what happens. And after some time, Paul said to Barnabas, "Let's go back and visit each city where we previously preached the word of the Lord to see how the new believers are doing." So what's happening there is Paul has already completed his first missionary journey. Barnabas was there, and so was a man named John Mark. And now they're getting ready to do the second trip, and Paul says, "Let's go back to the cities we just visited." Barnabas agreed and wanted to take along John Mark, but Paul disagreed strongly, since John Mark had deserted them in Pamphylia and had not continued with them in their work. Their disagreement was so sharp that they separated. Barnabas took John Mark with him and sailed for Cyprus. Paul chose Silas, and as he left, the believers entrusted him to the Lord's gracious care. So what's happened here? Well, Paul and Barnabas were headed out on their second missionary journey, and John Mark wants to come along with them again. But John Mark, on the first missionary journey, encountered some persecution that he was not prepared for. And so he quit that journey. He went home early. Now, Barnabas wants to give him a second chance. But Paul, Mr. Unity, Mr. Make every effort to be united in spirit, Paul refuses. And so they separate. And Paul ends up taking Silas, and Barnabas takes John Mark. Now, it's unfortunate that their disagreement led to separation, but there's more to these stories. Paul and Silas go on to the second missionary journey, and the Bible tells us that they visited 19 cities and converted hundreds of people to Christianity, including Lydia, who became the first convert on European soil. Barnabas and Mark, we don't know as much about their journey. What we do know is that John Mark decides to shrink his name from John Mark down to Mark, just Mark, and later ends up writing the Gospel of Mark. That's right. We probably would not have the Gospel of Mark if Barnabas hadn't come alongside John Mark and said, "Hey, it's okay, let's go on a missionary journey together." It's worth noting that the division meant twice as many missionaries were sent out. You see, separation does not have to be negative. In this case, Paul and Barnabas separated, but God blessed both journeys. The greatest schism in the Christian faith happened 500 years ago. For 1,500 years, the Christian church was constantly striving to be one universal church. So much so that they named it Catholic, which is the Greek word for universal. But 500 years ago, when Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to the Wittenberg door, the Protestant church was born. And God has used the Lutheran church and all the other Protestant denominations ever since to help build his kingdom. He has blessed both paths. John Wesley, the founder of one of those Protestant churches, the Methodist Church, he was no fan of schism. In fact, he wrote and preached a famous sermon in 1772 called On Schism, which outlined his reasons against it. Like most of Wesley's sermons, he didn't pull any punches. He called schism evil and equated it to heresy. But then just 12 years after he gives this sermon against schism, he separates from the Anglican Church and forms the Methodist denomination. The Methodist Episcopal Church in America was formed in 1784. So what is it, John? Do as I say, not as I do? What I believe for John Wesley is that he subscribed to this famous quotation that is often attributed to St. Augustine. In essentials, unity. In non-essentials, liberty. And in all things, charity. And so John used that to guide his thinking. And how do we apply that to our vote on Tuesday? I mean, as we prepare to vote for disaffiliation, do we vote for unity with the United Methodist Church or separation that could lead to the Global Methodist Church or an independent church? Well, this is for each member of the church to decide. You have to weigh the pros and cons. You have to decide what is essential and non-essential. You have to decide if the future direction of this church is with staying with the United Methodist Church or leaving and joining the Global Methodist Church or going elsewhere. So there are a couple things I do want to mention as you use these last 2 days to discern. If you like our current doctrine and the practices in the Book of Discipline, then your vote should be for disaffiliation, because the Book of Discipline is going to change next year. I know that we can call that speculation, but every person who's voting to stay United Methodist, almost every person who's voting to stay United Methodist, wants it to change, wants the book to change. And Asbury First United Methodist Church in downtown Rochester just put out a letter to their whole congregation saying it will change. Definitively, it is expected to change. And so if you like the discipline as it is, you need to vote to disaffiliate. Secondly, some of you have expressed concern about attracting more young people to the church, and that's a great concern. We all want more young people involved in our fellowship. The polls, and a lot of young people sitting up here up front, and so they probably know this, but the polls right now show that people in Gen Z are not choosing church very often, right? I mean, they're just not a lot of folks going to church. But what we also know from that is that the young people who do choose church are tending to choose a more conservative theology. In fact, if we look just in our neighborhood, I think the two churches in our neighborhood with the largest number of young people and young families are Northridge and Browncroft. And they both are conservative churches. So, something to consider. But I will say this, no matter which way the vote goes, we should always be a church that is looking to reach out to Gen Z and helping them navigate life together. The bottom line is that we will never be a perfect church no matter which way we vote, but I hope that we will always be a church that worships a perfect God. And so for those who are planning to be with us on Tuesday night to vote, I want to provide a little preparation. I will not be speaking that evening, nor will I be voting. As an ordained elder in the United Methodist Church, my membership lies with the Upper New York Annual Conference, not with the local church. I'll be present with you and praying with you that night. The ballot you receive will be entitled Disaffiliation for Reasons of Human Sexuality. That is because this disaffiliation process started as a result of our debates over human sexuality. Now, I know that some of you are voting to leave for other reasons. I know some of you are voting to stay for other reasons. But the vote must be titled that way because that is the only exit path. So the ballot has to reflect that. So I just wanted to warn you about that so that you won't be thrown by the title. If we vote to disaffiliate, that is just step one. I mentioned a couple weeks ago that step two would be to raise $191,000 for our conference as a buyout of sorts from the conference. Our affiliation committee was concerned that the money would hinder some people in their vote, and they did not want that to be a distraction. And so they took it upon themselves to call around to a few people asking, if we disaffiliate, how much would you be able to donate to that fund? And if we disaffiliate, how much might you be able to loan the church to help us meet that amount? And I'm pleased to tell you this morning that after making a few phone calls to some of the members in our church, we have already raised over $120,000 of that 191. So if we disaffiliate, we'll be well on our way to meeting that goal. So I hope this morning that you've heard my heart. No one likes conflict. This has been a difficult season for the life of the church. And yes, I do have a preference. But my first calling as your pastor has always been to love every single person that walks through that door. Every person is of sacred worth. So I want to close with Jude, a verse from Jude chapter 1, verse 3. Jude writes, I must write about something else, urging you to defend the faith that God has entrusted once for all time to his holy people. So I urge you to defend the faith. I urge you to vote your conscience. And may God grant us discernment and wisdom for such a time as this.